Ethan Pierce didn't make a grand entrance. That was never his style. He moved in on a Tuesday early morning while most of the neighborhood was at work or still finishing their coffee. The moving truck didn't blast music or block driveways. The movers were careful, efficient, if anything. The entire process felt almost too quiet for a new build that had sparked so much curiosity. His house, now standing complete at the end of the cul-de-sac, was unlike anything else on the block. It wasn't flashy or futuristic, but it didn't follow the same mold either. The front was a blend of wood and glass, smooth concrete steps framed by low native plants. No shutters, no gables, no faux brick. Just clean lines and warm tones that somehow felt both striking and calm at the same time. Some of the neighbors peeked through their blinds. A few stepped outside under the pretense of checking their mail. Mrs. Dobbs from 2 doors down waved, then pretended to rearrange her garden gnome. The Martins across the street stood quietly by their mailbox, whispering and watching. It wasn't hostility, not yet. It's more like a shared moment of silent confusion. Who was this man? And why did his house look like something out of an architecture magazine? Ethan noticed, of course. Architects tend to be observant. But he didn't mind. He was used to it. Every neighborhood had a rhythm, and any new beat made people look up. He had designed enough homes to know that unfamiliar didn't always mean unwelcome, not if you gave it time to settle. Inside, boxes still needed unpacking, but the space was already alive. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting soft shadows on the pale oak floors. The layout was open but intentional, with each corner offering a quiet function, a reading nook. A kitchen built for real cooking, a studio that looked out onto the backyard. Ethan had designed this house for himself, not a client, not a market trend, and every inch of it carried his signature. Simple, purposeful, honest. He unpacked slowly that day, pausing often to take in the space. He didn't rush to hang art or arrange furniture. He believed homes revealed themselves with time, like a conversation. First you listen, then you respond. By late afternoon, the neighborhood was humming with normal activity again. Buzzed. A delivery van rolled by. Kids rode scooters along the sidewalk. And then, right on cue, she appeared. Karen Whitmore. Perfect posture, smart beige slacks. A clipboard tucked neatly under her arm like a permanent accessory. She wasn't alone. A small dog trotted beside her, its matching bow collar, a familiar sight to every resident. She walked with the practiced pace of someone who wasn't just part of the neighborhood, but believed she held it together. She didn't approach the house. Not yet. She slowed down in front of it, tilted her head slightly, and scanned the facade like she was reading an unfamiliar language. Her eyes narrowed for just a second before she walked on. Ethan caught the moment from the window. He didn't wave. He just smiled. He remembered her, of course. How could he not? She had once called his work visionary. Had said it made her feel like she could breathe for the first time inside her own home. That was years ago, though. People change. So do preferences. Still, Ethan wondered if she'd recognize his touch. It was there in the way the roofline extended just past the front door, in the layered textures of wood and steel. In the way the windows framed trees instead of traffic. He unpacked one last box before sunset. Outside, the street fell quiet. Again. And somewhere down the block, behind a door with a carefully polished brass number, Karen Whitmore was already writing her thoughts down. Not in a welcome note, but on a form with the HOA's letterhead. Tomorrow. Ethan would find out that Tomodern was about to become the neighborhood's new conversation starter. The envelope arrived 2 days later. It was tucked neatly inside Ethan's mailbox, between a coupon flyer and a welcome letter from a local real estate office. The paper was thick, the logo stamped in silver at the top. The Homeowners Association's official stationery. The wording was formal, but the message was unmistakable. A concern had been raised. Ethan stood at his kitchen counter, the letter unfolded beside his coffee cup. The language was diplomatic. Phrases like aesthetic coherence and visual consistency padded the page. But one line stood out. The home's architectural style has been noted as significantly different from the overall design language of the neighborhood and may not align with existing community standards. No mention of rules broken, no direct accusation, just suggestion, a nudge, a warning dressed in courtesy. Ethan smiled almost to himself. He'd seen this before. Not this exact form, but this pattern. The hesitation, the discomfort, the coded language of someone wanting to say, "I don't like this," without saying it out loud. He flipped the page over. At the bottom, in small type, was a checkbox labeled "Submitted by Resident." Next to it, a printed name, Karen Whitmore. He leaned back and exhaled. So, it really was her. For a moment, he let the thought hang in the air. 15 years ago, he had designed Karen's house. The white one with the tall entryway and wide windows 3 doors down. She had asked for something graceful with an edge. She had said she wanted a house that didn't feel like every other one on the street. She had loved his portfolio. She had called his work fresh. He still remembered the way she'd circled certain words in the sketches he'd brought. Bold, clean, open. Now her house had shutters that weren't part of the original plan and a wreath on the door year-round. The window boxes were filled with synthetic flowers that matched the season. She had, somewhere along the way, embraced uniformity. Ethan folded the letter carefully and set it aside. He didn't feel annoyed. He felt curious. People change. That much he understood. But sometimes, people forgot the path they walked to arrive where they stood. Outside, the neighborhood went about its day. A child zipped by on a scooter. A lawn sprinkler popped to life across the street. Everything looked calm, undisturbed. But now Ethan could feel the quiet eyes. A few windows reflected sunlight just a little too directly. A garage door stayed open longer than it needed to. Someone, somewhere, was waiting for his reaction. He didn't give them one. Instead, he walked through his house. He looked at the natural light bending through the beams. He stepped out to the back patio where the fence lines met at soft angles, just the way he planned it. He checked the setback distance, the height limit, the materials used. Everything followed code. Everything was approved long before construction began. He knew this wouldn't be about rules. It never was. The next morning, he wrote a short email to the HOA board. It was respectful, clear, and without any defensiveness. He offered to meet, answer questions, or walk anyone through the home's design choices. He attached the original permits and approvals. He even included his credentials just in case anyone forgot. Then he took a deep breath and hit send. Later that afternoon, he passed Karen on the sidewalk. She was walking her dog, same clipboard in hand. She gave him a polite smile, the kind that lasted just a second too long to be natural. Ethan nodded in return. Neither said a word. But the next time Ethan looked at her house, he noticed something new. Not the shutters, not the wreath, something smaller. Just above her front door, etched in the glass panel he'd once designed himself, were the faint curves of his old signature. It was still there. Karen may not have liked his new house, but she still lived inside his work, and that, Ethan thought, was more poetic than anything he could have planned. The HOA board scheduled a meeting for the following week. It wasn't urgent, they said, but worth discussing to ensure everyone felt heard. Ethan replied with a courteous "happy to attend," then returned to his drafting table, where a half-finished concept for a downtown gallery sat waiting for him. He wasn't worried. Not yet. The letter had stirred curiosity, but it hadn't shaken him. He knew design always carried risk, even in quiet suburbs. But what lingered with him wasn't the complaint, was the irony. The one person to raise her voice about his modern house was the same person who once insisted her home be unlike anything else on the block. He still remembered that first meeting. It had been a crisp fall morning, years ago. At his studio downtown, Karen had walked in with fabric swatches, a Pinterest board, and a list of words she wanted her future house to embody. She used phrases like inviting but strong, open to light, and architectural but not cold. Ethan had listened carefully, sketched while she spoke, and within a week had produced the concept that would become her home. He remembered how her eyes lit up. When she first saw the design, "This doesn't look like anyone else's house on my street," she had said with pride. "That's the point," he replied. And now, all these years later, she was arguing that his house didn't belong. Ethan decided not to dwell on it. He had learned long ago that design isn't just about space seats, about memory, about people, and people change. He knew this better than most. Tastes shift, lines blur. Even the boldest eventually retreat into what feels familiar still. The story seemed too circular to ignore. So, the night before the HOA meeting, he went into his archives. His office shelves were lined with slim black boxes, each one labeled. By year, he pulled out the one marked Whitmore Residence Final Design. Inside were sketches, digital printouts, notes from their meetings. Even a few hand-drawn floor plan alternates Karen had enthusiastically praised. Tucked in the back was the original concept board. On it, in her handwriting, were 3 words: modern, timeless, elegant. He took a photo of it with his phone and slipped the board back into the box. He didn't plan to show it at the meeting, not unless he had to. He wasn't interested in embarrassing anyone. But if the discussion turned sharp, if anyone questioned his intent, he'd be ready. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a warm space with beige walls, folding chairs, and a snack table. Stocked with lemonade and butter cookies, about 20 residents attended, including Karen, who sat near the front with her clipboard resting neatly on her lap. Ethan sat toward the back, silent at first as the board opened with routine matters: tree trimming, holiday decorations, a reminder about trash bins. Then came the final item. A concern was raised regarding the visual consistency of a recently constructed home. The chairperson read aloud. "We'd like to open the floor for respectful discussion." Karen cleared her throat softly. "I believe the issue is about tone," she said. "We've built a community that reflects a shared character. This new home. It's lovely, of course, but it's very different. That difference can be jarring." Ethan stood slowly. "I appreciate the concern," he said, "and I agree my home is different. But it's also part of the neighborhood. It was built with care, with approval, and with the same intention I brought to other homes here, including yours, Karen." There was a brief silence. Karen blinked. "You designed my home?" she asked, the tone not quite surprised, more like caught off guard. Ethan nodded. 15 years ago. You asked for something elegant, modern, and unlike anything else on the street." More silence. Someone in the back coughed. A cookie snapped in someone's hand. "I guess I forgot," Karen said. "Softer now. It's okay." Ethan replied. "Happens more than you'd think." Teen knew she hadn't forgotten. Not really. And now, the whole room knew it too. The meeting ended with no vote. No resolution, and no real tension. And no real tension, just an awkward pause, where a debate almost began, but didn't. After Ethan spoke, no one else offered comments. Karen had smiled politely and shifted in her seat, then looked down at her clipboard, as if it suddenly had something more important on it. Ethan hadn't meant to call her out. But the truth had a strange way of landing gently when it came without judgment. That he'd learned over years of walking clients through floor plans and possibilities. Say less, but make it matter. Still, he could feel the ripple that moment had caused. It wasn't loud, but it was moving. The next morning, Ethan sat at his desk and composed a short email, not to the whole board, just to the chair. He thanked them for hosting the meeting and reiterated that his house met all architectural guidelines and received full approval during the design phase. Then, as a quiet reminder, he attached 3 images. The front elevation drawing of Karen's home, K-cropped version of her original style guide, And a scanned note in her handwriting from the design folder. It read, "Love the long windows. Very modern feel. Different but clean. Feels like a future I want to live in." He signed the email simply, "Just wanted to remind everyone where we all started. Warmly, Ethan." He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't need one that afternoon while tending to the planter beds near his porch. Ethan saw a slow parade of casual passersby. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact before now waved. A few complimented the native landscaping or asked who designed his outdoor lighting. One man, a tall retiree who lived near the corner, paused longer than most. "Didn't think I liked modern," the man said, adjusting his hat. "But yours has. Balance makes the rest of us look a little dated, to be honest." Ethan smiled. "I didn't build it to stand out, just to feel like home." The man nodded. "Well, it does." Word had clearly gotten around. Not in a gossipy way, more like the neighborhood had collectively remembered something they'd forgotten. That Karen's house, though now wrapped in seasonal decor and HOA-approved shrubbery, had once been the boldest on the block. That wasn't a problem then. It had been admired, and if hers had once belonged, why wouldn't his? That evening, Ethan passed Karen during her usual walk. She was alone this time. No clipboard, no tiny dog. Just a slow, thoughtful pace. She hesitated when she saw him, then took a few steps toward his driveway. "I looked through my old emails," she said. Ethan stood still, watching her. "You were right," she continued. "I'd forgotten how excited I was back then. The sketches, the renderings, you gave me exactly what I wanted." "I'm glad it still feels like home," he said gently. "It does. I think I just got used to it. You live in something long enough, it starts to feel ordinary. Then something new shows up, and suddenly yours doesn't feel special anymore." "Maybe that's what I didn't like." Ethan nodded. "Familiar can be beautiful, but so can contrast." Karen looked up at his house, at the way the porch lights softened the sharp lines of the siding, at the quiet symmetry in the asymmetry. "I suppose I owe you a thank you," she said. "Only if you mean it," he replied. She let out the faintest laugh, then turned to leave. "See you around, Ethan," as she walked away. Ethan returned to his house. The windows glowed from the inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar. He didn't need applause or recognition. He just needed that one shift, that moment when judgment softened into understanding. Sometimes a quiet reminder said everything. The season began to change almost without notice. The air carried less heat in the morning now, and the light filtered through the neighborhood trees at a softer angle. It was the kind of shift you didn't see at once, but felt in the way the breeze lingered longer, or how the evenings seemed quieter. And somehow, the neighborhood shifted with it. Ethan noticed it most in the little things. The way people slowed down when walking past his house. The way conversations at the mailbox took just a few seconds longer, often ending with a glance toward the clean lines of his front porch. A few neighbors even stopped to ask about specific features. The wood siding, the solar panels discreetly hidden on the back slope, the low water landscaping. No one mentioned the HOA letter. Not directly, but the silence around it had changed shape. What once felt like quiet judgment now felt more like cautious curiosity. One afternoon, Ethan received a note in his mailbox, handwritten, folded carefully, with no name. It read, "We weren't sure at first. Now we see it. It fits. Maybe even more than the rest of us." There was no signature. It's just that. And that was enough. A few days later, Ethan spotted something strange. Karen's shutters were gone. The house he had designed for her, once his proudest residential project, now faded by layers of years and updates, suddenly looked a little closer to its original form. Cleaner, simpler. The windows, without the decorative frames, felt open. Again, it was a small change, but it spoke volumes. Later that week, during a walk, Karen waved him over. Took the shutters off, she said casually. I noticed, Ethan replied. It looks good. Closer to the original. She smiled faintly. I've found the old plans. You were right. I'd added too much over the years. It felt safe, expected, easy to do, he said. But homes remember what they were meant to be? Karen looked toward her house, then at his. Maybe we just forget how to see things clearly, especially when we're too used to them. Ethan nodded. Seeing is a skill. Remembering takes practice. She laughed at that. I forgot how philosophical architects can be. Only when we're standing still, he said with a grin, by the end of the week. Ethan had received 3 inquiries from neighbors. Nothing formal, just polite interest in ideas. One couple asked if he'd help sketch a patio redesign. Another wanted his opinion on a kitchen expansion. A third, more quietly, wondered if he ever hosted design workshops. I'm not looking to change everything, one neighbor said. I just want my house to feel more like ... me. Ethan liked that. He didn't come here to start a movement. He didn't need to be the neighborhood's new favorite. He just wanted to live in something honest. But maybe, just maybe, honesty was contagious. One evening just after sunset, Ethan stood outside with a cup of tea. The light from inside his home poured gently across the porch. Few houses away, lights flicked on in neat rows, each glow a little different. Some warm and golden, some bright and blue. It's all part of the same neighborhood. All quietly unique, even when they tried not to be. Karen stepped outside with her dog. Oh, now, leash free. The tiny pup trotting confidently down her driveway. She looked at Ethan and raised a hand, her expression softer than ever. Nice light tonight. She called. Ethan smiled. It's always there. Sometimes we just need the right angle. He watched as she paused, looked up at the sky, and then, for the first time since he moved in, walked past his house without stopping to judge. She just walked, and that, Ethan thought, was the beginning of something better. By mid-autumn, something unexpected was happening. The neighborhood wasn't changing all at once, but it was shifting, quietly. One house repainted its front door, a deep charcoal gray, replacing the standard beige every home seemed to share. Another neighbor removed the overly ornate garden gnomes that lined their walkway, trading them for clean stone planters. A third planted a small grove of native grasses in place of their water-hungry lawn. They were small changes, intentional ones. None of them made headlines or required approval. But to Ethan, they spoke volumes. It was as if the neighborhood had stopped trying to match each other and had started asking a different question. What feels right for me? And somehow, they had traced that question back to his home. Ethan hadn't set out to be an example, but his house had become one. Not because it shouted for attention, but because it didn't. It simply stood where it was, made of honest materials, designed with light in mind, shaped by restraint. One Saturday morning, while he was clearing out a section of his side yard, a neighbor named Cole stopped by. He lived at the end of the street, a software engineer, always polite, rarely visible. I hope this isn't weird, Cole said, offering a small wave. But I've been watching your house. The way it takes light in the morning, I don't know. It made me think about mine. Ethan smiled, setting his gloves down. That's not weird at all. It's kind of the whole point. Cole shifted his weight. Do you do consults? Nothing fancy. I just want to rethink the back patio. Feels boxed in. Ethan motioned toward the porch. Grab a coffee. Let's sketch something. They sat for nearly 2 hours talking about sightlines and flow, about how to invite more air into a closed space. Ethan offered ideas, but never dictated. He asked more questions than he answered, and by the end, Cole looked like he was seeing his home for the first time. That afternoon, another email came in, this one from the HOA board, short, professional. And to Ethan's mild surprise, positive. We've had several inquiries from residents about design advice. Your name has come up more than once. We'd like to know if you'd be open to hosting a casual design walk. an informal event where homeowners can tour your home, ask questions, and explore ideas. No pressure, just inspiration. Ethan stared at the message for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. A design walk. In the same neighborhood where his home had been quietly challenged just weeks before, he replied the next morning with a simple, "Yes, happy to. Let me know the date." The flyer went out a week later. Nothing flashy. Just a small notice on the HOA board and the community newsletter. House as home, a guided walk with Ethan Marsh Saturday. 4 p.m., light refreshments served. All welcome. That Saturday, 22 people showed up. They walked slowly through his home, stepping carefully, taking in the structure, the intentional choices, the quietness of it all. Ethan answered questions, pointed out materials, explained how light played off certain surfaces at specific times of day. He never talked about trends or resale value. He talked about feeling and flow and stillness. Karen came too. She stayed near the back, quiet, watching with a notebook in her hand. She didn't ask questions this time, but at the end, as the guests began to drift away, she approached Ethan on the porch. "This was generous," she said. "I've learned," he said softly, "that sometimes what feels different at first is just what we hadn't yet made space for." Karen looked out at the other houses, at the small renovations taking shape one door at a time. "Looks like there's more space now than we thought." Ethan nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Turns out, change doesn't need permission. It's just a little light." The design walk was a quiet success, rippling through the neighborhood like a gentle breeze. Ethan noticed it in the subtle shifts around him. Neighbors pausing to chat about materials or color choices. A few homeowners pulling out tape measures to reimagine their spaces. Others simply stopping to appreciate the play of sunlight on their own porches in a way they hadn't before. Ethan's home had become more than a house. It was now a catalyst for curiosity. That week, he received a message from one of the newer residents, a young couple who'd just moved in down the street. They'd heard about the design walk and were eager to discuss ideas for their own place. They met Ethan for coffee at the local cafe, where conversation flowed easily. From landscaping possibilities to interior layouts to creating spaces that felt like sanctuary. "I want something that feels modern but still warm," the wife said, tracing the rim of her cup. "That's the heart of it," Ethan replied. "Modern doesn't have to be cold. It's about balance." They laughed at the simplicity of the idea and the complexity of achieving it. Yet in that moment, Ethan felt that connection, the one he'd first had with Karen years ago when designing her home. It reminded him that architecture wasn't just about buildings, it was about life. Later, walking back to his house, Ethan passed by Karen's front yard. She was tending to a small garden patch, her movements deliberate and calm. When she looked up and caught his eye, she waved, this time with ease and genuine warmth. "You're making this neighborhood more interesting," she said quietly. "Only what was already here," he answered. She smiled, then nodded toward her house. "I'm starting to think maybe the shutters weren't the problem. Maybe it was me." They shared a brief laugh before she continued. "I'm trying to be more open to change, even if it's uncomfortable at first." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Change is often just perspective shifting. Sometimes the hardest part is learning to see differently. That night, Ethan reflected on the last few weeks. The subtle changes around him, the evolving conversations, the small but significant moments where people started to embrace individuality alongside community. It wasn't about tearing down rules or appending tradition. It was about expanding the definition of home. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with a fresh energy. Ethan watched from his porch as neighbors swapped paint samples, shared stories about DIY projects, discussed new ways to brighten front yards without losing harmony. One afternoon, a few children ran past, giggling. A couple of teenagers gathered on the sidewalk, admiring a newly installed bench that Ethan had suggested to a neighbor. It was simple, elegant, a small invitation to pause and connect. Even the HOA seemed less rigid, with board members openly encouraging residents to express creativity within the framework they'd all agreed upon. Ethan found himself invited to more conversations, not just about design, but about the future of their neighborhood. How to make it welcoming, adaptable, and alive. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Karen stopped by again. She brought a small gift, a framed photo of her home taken years ago, when it was fresh and new. "I found this while cleaning," she said, handing it to Ethan. "A reminder of where we started." Ethan looked at the image, a bright, confident home with clean lines and wide windows. He saw not just the house, but the promise it held. "Thanks, Karen," he said softly. She smiled, then added, "Thanks for reminding me how to see again." As she walked away, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. This neighborhood was no longer just a collection of houses. It was a living, breathing story, one where every chapter mattered, and he couldn't wait to see where the next one would lead. The weeks that followed were quieter, but filled with a newfound sense of ease. Ethan noticed how the neighborhood had subtly transformed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The subtle renovations, the small design tweaks, and the softening of once rigid opinions had all woven together into a stronger fabric. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't uniform, but it was genuine. One Saturday morning, Ethan was outside when Karen approached carrying a box of freshly baked cookies. She handed him one with a smile. "I thought we could use a little celebration," she said. Ethan chuckled, accepting the cookie. "For what?" "For remembering, for moving forward, for understanding that change isn't the enemy." They stood side by side, looking out at the street lined with homes, each one different, yet somehow connected. "Funny thing about architecture," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "It's not just about buildings, it's about people, and how they live." Karen nodded thoughtfully. "I was so focused on fitting in that I forgot what I loved about my own home." "It takes courage to rediscover that," Ethan replied. "But it's worth it." Their conversation drifted into stories of past projects, favorite designs, and the challenge of balancing vision with reality. For the first time in a long while, there was no defensiveness, only mutual respect. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood gathered for an informal get-together in the park. The air was crisp, filled with laughter and the scent of autumn leaves. Kids ran between groups of adults, and the sound of guitars and soft conversations filled the space. Ethan watched as neighbors mingled, sharing ideas and dreams for their homes and their community. He caught Karen's eye from across the circle. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her gaze. In that moment, Ethan realized something fundamental had shifted. Home wasn't just a place defined by rules or styles. It was a feeling, a connection, a shared understanding that even in differences, there was unity. His house, once labeled too modern, now stood proudly among its neighbors, not as an outlier, but as a part of a living story. One that embraced evolution without losing its roots. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. He had designed more than a house. He had helped design a community that could grow and adapt, one that could hold space for every voice and every vision. And in doing so, he had found a deeper meaning for home itself. He turned toward his front door, the warm glow spilling out, to welcome him inside, because home, after all, is where understanding begins.